Welcome to Clue's end of internship presentation. So whenever you're ready, Daniela.
Hi, everyone. So my name is Daniela Napoli, and for anyone who doesn't know me, I'm a PhD student in the computer science program. Today I'm talking about UX personas and my experience working with CIHI, the Canadian Institute for Health Information. I interned for them last fall. As much of everyone else, it was a totally remote experience, which was interesting and maybe something we can end up talking about during this workshop. But a little bit about CIHI. It's a Canadian nonprofit organization that was founded 26 years ago. Their slogan is better data, better decisions, healthier Canadians. So, what they do is they actually aggregate and disseminate health related information from service providers and then sending it back to health service providers. The idea is that they want to take all of the data about Canadians and their health, repackage it so that it's something that is useful for healthcare providers. They also serve as a regulatory body for this data. So they help shape sort of the policies and the other sort of structures that it comes to cleaning up data and making it into something that is easy to work with. So the main people that work with CIHI obviously are people involved in healthcare, but also academic researchers, students, journalists, and other government bodies who make policies that also want to know about healthcare services in the country. So what does CIHI do? Well, CIHI serves many different kinds of people, like I just mentioned. At an oversimplified high level, they offer two main groups of offerings. So the first group includes resources related to organizing healthcare data. They provide tools to look up national coding standards used by healthcare service providers across the country, and these standards help with anonymizing and consolidating patient information. So this is trickier than it seems because the policies and the methods from each and every different hospital or healthcare provider actually varies per province, per city, per hospital. So it's a lot to manage. And the people who are recording data need to refer to CIHI's online tools to help get their data into a standard shape. So after all that data has been standardized, CIHI then as in-house analysts who dig into this data, and they produce reports and other sorts of databases and dashboards that summarize particular trends or disparities or other sorts of research questions. So for example, they recently released an infographic describing the number of healthcare workers who contracted and died from COVID-19. And on the right there is a little snippet showing the number of total cases in orange as of January 2021 and the percentage of cases that were healthcare workers in the light blue row. So information in these infographics are used, as I mentioned, by so many different groups, including the healthcare directors that these nurses and these doctors belong to, but also the government organizations who are looking to develop policies, media outlets who want to fact check their news reports, and people like us who just want to learn more for their academic research. So, what was my role at CIHI? Well, during the fall, I completed a full time internship. I worked with the UX team within the digital branch of the organization, and my internship supervisor was Khalil, the UX team lead. But for almost all of my project, I worked really closely with the senior UX analyst, Natalie, and she was an excellent mentor. She taught me so much about the industry, and I deeply thank her for that. So during my internship, what did I do? I was given a lot of opportunities to work on projects that actually impacted the organization, and that was great. I got to sit down with user data. I got to find ways to automate the UX team's processes. I facilitated ideation sessions to loop in non UX teams into our initiatives. I interviewed users, I made journey maps, I conducted literature reviews, competitor analyses, and we also spent a lot of time creating UX personas. And this is why I want to focus on that project for today's talk. So really quickly, personas are descriptions of a user group or a user archetype, and they detail attitudes, motivations, goals, and pain points. And when you pair a persona with a scenario, It can be super useful for identifying user requirements. It provides context for design decisions, and it can also inspire research goals. Most of all, I think that they're really helpful for building empathy for a user group. And this empathy building aspect is especially useful for a multidisciplinary team that includes UX but also has a wide variety of responsibilities and priorities, like software design or business goals. Um, Personas can help everyone stay focused on users' needs. So how were the personas used? Well, as I mentioned, at a high level, CIHI collects healthcare data, analyzes it, and then produces reports. They have a number of user groups, ranging from healthcare workers on the ground floor diagnosing patients and recording and submitting data, analysts who dig into this data to produce reports for the public, and then other analysts who are actually belong to their organization and want to do their own analysis, policymakers who need this data so that they can create policies, patients and patients' family who want to learn about their conditions. And as you can imagine, these are a lot of users to keep track of. So personas were a really easy way to summarize key user concerns and keep all of the teams aligned on the goals that were meaningful to those users. How were the personas made? Well, I wanted to preamble this portion with a little note about personas because these tools can look different depending on your team or your project. So the Nielsen-Norman group suggests that there are three types of personas: proto, qualitative, statistical. Each of these personas become progressively more fleshed out and validated with increased data, and the prototypes we were working on were about midway through this spectrum. So the UX team shaped their personas with research from interviews and usability tests and log data, and the personas were robust. The ultimate goal was to eventually create statistical personas that would be informed by data from larger groups of people, larger surveys, and could be validated. What was our process like? Well, here's an illustration. As you can see, it was a really iterative process. So the personas were first made based in research that happened before I joined the team. And then my first job was to go back, review, analyze, and connect a bunch of different previous studies to identify areas of improvement for the personas. And I created a version 2. And once that version 2 was made, we shared it with the other teams in CIHI who used personas. And they cross-referenced their research to find areas to improve on the second version. And then we integrated that feedback to make a third version. Then we brought this third version to real users and asked them if the persona accurately reflected their lived experiences. And that was a fun conversation to have because people sat down and said, yes, this is related, and no, I don't know where that came from. So it was really interesting. And looping in users, you would imagine that at this point, we've at the third iteration that we'd have everything that we needed, but looping in users is always helpful no matter what stage you're on. Finally, we integrated that user feedback to make a fourth version. And we gave that fourth version to UX designers so that they could sit down and see if they had the if it if and had the opportunity to use those personas and see if it met all of the requirements that they needed to design things. The idea is that the personas are not done and that they will continue to improve even after I'm gone. Now, why are personas important? Well, I've kind of mentioned this before, but the question is, why spend so much time and effort to make these things? For Natalie and I, who worked on UX analysis projects, these personas provided us with confident knowledge to base our research and our suggestions to designers and other teams. And the UX designers also appreciated having accurate insight so that they could defend their design decisions when they had to go to other teams with proposals. The personas were also used by the other teams, which I'll talk more about later. My 3 lessons learned from interning at CIHI. For some of you, personas are very familiar. And like you, personas were not new to me when I first joined CIHI. I learned about them through the HCI courses, previous internships, and I even teach them to undergraduate students when I TA. But with CIHI's UX team, I thought about personas in a totally different way that I had not considered before. First, I mentioned that personas can be very robust. A key lesson I learned while working on personas with ChiHi is not to be afraid to throw away the persona templates you think that you should use. Instead, change your persona to better suit your needs. For example, on the left here, this resembles a typical persona template. It has a large portrait of a user, it has their name, their job, some biographical information about their hobbies and their personal life. It has pictures to represent their likes and their behaviors. And this template is really similar to the first iteration of our persona. But as our research went on, we realized that for our strategy based goals, like planning for an entirely new product, this kind of persona wasn't really helpful. Our personas needed to evolve to something more like on the right hand side. So, right off the bat, you'll notice there's less room for biographical information. It doesn't matter how a person looks or what brands they like or what their hobbies are. Instead, we needed to make our personas more focused on the goals within the context of our new project and focus on the relationships that they had with all of the different stakeholders in ChiHi's economy. Made more room to talk about what the person does with our current products and what they wish they could do when things would be changing. We found this template helped us better capture our data driven approach and the trends that we found in our analytical log data. I learned that what changing persona typically, I learned that changing personas, what they typically look like, can be necessary, especially when you have quantifiable characteristics and they are becoming important to justify decisions, which could be expensive or time consuming. So, my second lesson learned um, is about the relationships between personas. So before working with ChiHi, when making personas, I would hyper focus on a user type that I was currently working on. And this really helps to flesh out the nuances of a particular archetype, but it can also be pretty short sighted. So while working at ChiHi, our senior UX analyst, Natalie, developed a persona framework, and this framework reflected ChiHi's entire audience system. It articulated the interdependent relationships between each of the personas. And this framework allowed us to identify interrelated processes and shared pain points. A framework like this helped to contextualize a single persona and extend its utility. So, for example, when we took time to understand the relationship between a healthcare practitioner and a data analyst, when we conducted research for one of these personas, we would inadvertently uncover opportunities or pain points for another set of users. We could better understand why a practitioner had hard time recording data when we could better understand why an analyst had missing data during their tests. So, through my work at ChiHi, I learned that yes, personas are useful, but they can be even more useful when you weave them together with other personas and understand, sorry, my the captions are covering my notes, and understand the context of how users um, experiences interact with each other. So the third lesson I learned is that when you have a robust set of personas and clearly articulated relationships between the user groups, more than the UX team can benefit. And this was worth it for us because it helped us to significantly streamline collaboration among all of the teams involved in modifying current systems and proposing designs for new systems. For example, the analytics team could link their logged in user data with personas that we had created and could better understand the trends that they saw. Also, the CIHI's education department is responsible for teaching healthcare practitioners how to work with some of the standards and coding rules that CIHI comes up with. And they found the personas really helpful for shaping their course content and targeting specific groups that might be struggling with sharing data. So some of these key lessons help explain why personas can be important to a UX team and more. Yet one of my favorite things about my internship was that I used my HCI knowledge to help a nonprofit organization support our healthcare system. And as a human-centric organization, Empathy building tools like personas are super critical for steering decisions without losing focus on the main demographic, the people of Canada. And that's the end of my presentation. Thank you for listening. Before I wrapped up, I wanted to take a chance to sincerely thank NSERC, Audrey, Sonia, Tamara, Jin, and the previous Clue administrators for facilitating such incredible internships. I was lucky to be a Clue student for both my master's and my PhD. So I was able to have 3 amazing internship opportunities with CAE, IBM, and CIHI. And each of these opportunities developed my HCI knowledge and professionalism. And I can't wait to join the industry because I feel really confident and well equipped after all of this experience. So a huge thank you to Clue. And thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Daniela. That was a really great presentation. Can you elaborate a bit, like what happens after you create persona? I think you kind of touched upon this in one of your slides, but I would love to hear more about the next step after persona.
Yeah, for sure. After we got the personas, they were put to use by a number of different groups. So for us, Natalie and I were analysts. So what we did with the personas was really focus on the pain points and also what information was missing. And what that did for us was give us an opportunity to uncover potential research questions and justification for our next research projects. So we would say, hey, according to this persona, there's this empty information that we don't know, we're going to need to run a test. And then we'll talk to our lead, and then the lead says, hey, you're right, like all of the pieces come together and there's a spot missing, so let's focus on that. So that's where personas come in for an analyst. For a designer, they typically use personas to understand the user needs in their for their designs, what pain points can be identified, so what pieces might need to be tweaked in the design, and they also use it to help justify some of the decisions that they come with. So if they're proposing a design to a dev team or to somebody else, those people might come back and say, well, why are you doing it that way? And a designer can refer to our research and say, well, according to our personas, that is based on all this data and what real people think, this is the decision that we're going with. So it's super helpful for a designer too.
Is there like a particular tool, like software that you use to create persona?
So we used Adobe Creative Suite. I forget what the app was. I think it's XD, Adobe XD, to just sort of make the template by hand. But I think that there are a ton of online software tools that can give you sort of a template and you can fill that information into. But like I mentioned, sometimes those templates don't exactly suit your needs. So in our first iteration, we had a lot of information that was taking up so much real estate that we didn't even refer to, and it didn't even make sense. Like, why are we prioritizing this information when we have so much more that we need to focus on? So sometimes using, just the regular wireframing tools can really come in handy for making personas.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you, Daniela, again for your presentation.
Thanks.
Okay, I think we have our next speaker ready. James, whenever you're ready, you're good to go.
Perfect. Thank you. I'm just going to share my screen. Perfect. All right. So hi, everyone. Thank you all for being here today. My name is James Vellan, and today I'm going to be talking about mixed methods approaches to usability testing based on my own experiences working at Immigration, Refugees, and Citizenship Canada. So just to give you a brief outline of what I'm going to be talking about today, I'm going to start with a very brief description about what qualitative and quantitative data is and some distinctions between the two. I'm then going to talk about which type of data you might want to choose based upon your specific research questions and projects, and when it might be beneficial for you to actually combine them, which is what's going to be the focus of this talk today. I'm then going to talk a little bit about the resource requirements that you might want to consider using mixed methods approaches, as well as how to actually measure data, qualitative and quantitative data. Finally, I'm going to talk very briefly about developing measures of your own in the context of quantitative data, drawing conclusions under a mixed methods framework, and then just provide you a brief summary of the presentation as a whole. So to start, what is qualitative and quantitative data? So qualitative data, as you might be familiar with, is that data which is non-numerical and is data that you can't inherently categorize or measure. And this is data that you might obtain via interviews, open-ended questionnaires, that sort of thing. And in essence, it's something that you can't, as I mentioned, you can inherently categorize it or quantify it, and this requires some form of resource-intensive analyzing of the data, sitting down and familiarizing yourself with it. Quantitative data, on the other hand, is numerical data that you can obtain in a variety of ways, such as via Likert scales, those 1 to 7, strongly disagree to strongly agree sort of scales. You might be interested in something such as time on task, so how long users actually take to complete a specific task within your product. You might also look at the frequency of an event of interest. So how often do users perform a particular thing in the context of using your product? So based on this, qualitative and quantitative data may seem inherently at odds with each other. They're not easily combinable. They're not easily analyzed in the same methods. And typically qualitative data is often seen as being less than quantitative data in the sense that it's less definitive and less serious. But despite this, I think that combining both methods can lead to a richer understanding and conclusions for both usability testing and user experience as a whole. So the question of which method to choose, qualitative versus quantitative, or when mixing methods, I think depends largely on two things. The first of which is your research question. So how you frame your research question might inherently favor you towards choosing one method over another, or to combining both of them. And to a lesser extent, I think it also depends on your project design. So how you've designed your particular research project and what exactly you're looking to get out of your research project will affect which methods you might favor and allow for the opportunity to combine methods. So when it comes to choosing based on your research question, you might find that quantitative approaches are ideal for testing specific predictions and answering specific hypotheses. So for example, you might ask yourself, is there a difference in performance between these two groups? So when they're using your product, are they using it in the same way? Are they getting to the answer in maybe the same time? Are they performing the same sorts of errors? Something to that effect. You might also be interested in specific variables that predict task success. Perhaps you already have an idea about the types of things that make using your particular product difficult for some users. So then you can design manipulations for these variables to see to what extent they actually influence successful use of the product. So in contrast, qualitative approaches are ideal for answering broad questions and obtaining very nuanced answers. So for example, you might ask, why do users find this particular feature to be frustrating? And you might be asking this question perhaps because you don't necessarily have a good idea at the beginning of a research project what sort of factors are making a particular feature to be frustrating. Or perhaps you do, and you're trying to get much more nuanced answers and a richer understanding. And the important thing I want to mention here is that these two sorts of data aren't mutually exclusive and can in fact feed into one another. So the results you obtain and the conclusions you draw from analyzing one particular stream of data can feed into and inform research questions for using a different stream, which is why combining methods can be beneficial. When it comes to choosing based on project design, you might find, as I mentioned previously, that some project goals are far more conducive to one methodology over another, or to combining both methods. So as I mentioned, qualitative and quantitative data can feed into one another. So by by starting off very broadly, say, with a qualitative analysis based on interview data, you can then develop specific predictions and research questions that are very conducive to quantitative approaches. And then alternatively, results that you obtain from quantitative analyses can perhaps force you to go broader and investigate certain questions from a qualitative angle. You might also find that sometimes particular participant behaviors and responses might differ depending on the type of approach you might want to adopt. So for instance, at IRCC, we're in the process of testing an unconscious bias tip sheet, which is designed to make management aware of unconscious bias when it comes to workplace interactions and hiring decisions. Now, unconscious bias, as you might imagine, is something that many people would consider to be a very sensitive topic. So in order to avoid things such as socially desirable responding and having participants guess what the demands of the particular test are, we thought that approaching it from a quantitative angle and getting participants to respond in the form of scales might eliminate some of the bias and some of the pressure to respond in a certain way based on being interviewed in the context of a usability test, as qualitative testing would have them do. So when it comes to combining the methods, as I've stressed before, it may be beneficial to employ both methods to investigate a problem. So for as an example, users might find it difficult to interact with a particular section of a website. So you might develop research questions that will tackle both very broad topics in order to get more information, and then develop specific quantitative hypotheses and test them that way. So an example of this, you might ask yourself, what, according to users, makes this site difficult to use? This question would certainly be very conducive to a qualitative approach. And then from there, once you've accumulated a bit of information, you then might ask yourself, how do these certain aspects of the site affect its successful use? So by developing specific hypotheses and testing them, you get both the what and then the data to back it up. As you might imagine, there's both pros and cons to combining qualitative and quantitative methods into a mixed methods approach. One major pro is that it allows for a more complete understanding of the problem. As well, you can refine the approach for one method based on the insights of another. It's very much iterative and conducive to very long projects where you're trying to establish a thorough understanding of the problem. A con, however, is that it is more resource intensive. In the context of qualitative analyses, the resource cost comes from the sheer number of participants you need to collect data from, and more participants is obviously can be very much quite demanding on your recruitment strategies. However, cons for recruitment with qualitative data is that you will spend more resources analyzing the data and actually conducting interviews, let's say. As well, you may require at least some stats knowledge for quantitative data analysis. Some analysis may be very basic, but other analysis can be very complex. It might require statistical knowledge that you might not necessarily be familiar with. Resources, as I mentioned, depend very much so on the approach and your specific resource and your specific research question. Quantitative approaches might demand several dozen to several hundreds of participants. That depends on the analysis and the type of statistics you need to run. Statistics, you need to consider the underlying assumptions that make these tests valid and reliable. And if you don't meet those assumptions, then it might not be in your best interest to actually conduct that test. However, qualitative analyses will require a lot less resources in terms of participants, but will counter that by requiring more resources in terms of time to conduct the interviews and to analyze the data later on. In terms of participant sample size, You might elect to employ a small predefined sample size, or you might elect to employ what's called theoretical sampling. So theoretical sampling here is when you use insights that you would gain from earlier sessions to inform later sessions in sampling. So say, for instance, a participant in one session raises something that you haven't previously observed in previous sessions. It's a new insight for you and the team. You might sample participants who have specifically encountered that problem or have that specific experience in order to flesh out your understanding of what exactly that experience is, get a more complete understanding of that experience. And you would typically do this until theoretical saturation is reached. So theoretical saturation is the point at which you're no longer getting new insights from your participants, and your understanding is as complete as it's going to be for that specific research question. So estimates vary as to when exactly theoretical saturation would be reached. Some of the more liberal estimates would place this at anywhere from 6 to 12 participants, but some of the more conservative estimates might say you need as many as 30 participants. More realistically, your research problem and research question will fall somewhere in between the two. So when it comes to actually measuring data itself, qualitative methods, you're really coding data based on emerging themes. And there's several theoretical lenses in which you might choose to adopt analyzing this data, but ultimately it comes down to sitting down with the data, reading through it, excuse me, and familiarizing yourself with the data and coding it accordingly. Really, you're letting your data guide you. And depending on your particular theoretical lens and project demands, you might be as objective or as subjective as you want when it comes to actually analyzing your data. Quantitative methods, however, will typically involve one or more statistical analyses based on the type of data you have, and very much try to be as objective as possible. Now, to that end, I would recommend that you want to plan out your analyses in advance based on the type of data that you know you'll be collecting and your specific research question. Really here, what you want to look for when you're planning is you want to determine what you want to measure and how you want to measure it. Doing so will not only give you a good idea of what your data will look like and how you're actually going to measure it based on the assumptions you have about the data. But if your data don't actually meet your assumptions, then you'll have a backup plan in place to analyze your data based on how the assumptions are violated and based on the type of data that you actually do have. So when it comes to developing measures in the context of Likert scales, let's say, for most applications, it's typically better to use an existing measure. Reason being is that, first off, this measure has been developed with a specific application in mind. If you have a scale that's measuring usability, let's say, typically scales that are out there and available have been validated with thousands of participants beforehand, and they measure according to how they've been developed and are valid in that respect. And so if your use case matches up with the application that's been developed for, it's very easy to quickly use it and know you're getting valid and reliable results. If, however, you have an application where you would benefit from a purpose-built measure in your own work, as I attempt to do at IRCC, here are some considerations that I would recommend when it comes to actually developing measures for yourself. So the first thing you would want to consider is the applications for the measure. So how the measure is going to be used, when it's going to be used, and what sort of things you're looking to get out of it. You want to collaborate with colleagues during the development of the measure. Not only will this help you define what you're trying to measure as completely as possible, but it'll also get your colleagues on board with what the measure is actually measuring. You'll want to use this measure for a while, presumably because it's a big investment to develop a measure. And so with that in mind, you want to make sure that the whole team is on board with it. And as I mentioned, you'll also just want to capture as much of the construct you're trying to measure as possible. Get a complete definition, or as complete of a definition of what you're trying to measure as you can, and then from there develop questions that capture as much of that definition as possible. Other considerations for developing a measure are the sample size they would need for validation. Often this includes several hundred participants completing the measure, which might be realistic and easily doable for some employers, but for others it might not necessarily be that easy. As well, you might want to control for overall length of the measure. So a 60-item questionnaire would certainly provide a complete measure of the construct that you're actually trying to measure, but it might not be realistic for a lot of people to want to complete in a length of time that you give them. In an online application, it's a lot easier for someone to simply close their browser window rather than sit through a half-hour questionnaire. Now, when it comes to drawing conclusions in mixed methods approaches, you should consider both data streams in relation to both the overall research question and in relation to each other. Mixed methods approaches and reporting data more generally is really boils down to telling a story about your data, contextualizing the results and what they mean. And so you should not only do that for both of your data streams, but in relation to each of the data streams. So how are they the same? How do they support each other? As well as how do they differ from each other? As well, you want to give your data streams equal weight. And what I mean by that is you want to consider both data streams as being, equally valid and treat them as such. There's a tendency, certainly in psychology, but elsewhere as well, that qualitative data is less than quantitative data. And I'm of the opinion that that's simply not true. And employing a mixed methods approach, I believe you have to treat it that way as well, that your data, both qualitative and quantitative, is equally valid and coming from your participants in an equally valid way. And so you should treat it as such. So just in summary, mixed methods approaches have the potential to generate far greater insights than either qualitative and quantitative methods alone. And they give a more complete understanding of the problem and research question at hand. However, they do so at the expense of greater resource and knowledge requirements. However, if your project can accommodate mixed methods approaches, consider incorporating them because generally speaking, they could do nothing but good for a given project. So I'd like to thank NSERC, the CLUE program, and IRCC for having me as their internship student. And thank you for listening.
Thank you, James, for your presentation. I think our next speaker is Leah.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. I think I have a few guests here today. Thank you for supporting me. So my name is ChangAn, and you can also call me Leah. I'm a first-year PhD student at our School of Information Technology. And today I'm going to share my internship experience at Atomic Cartoons. So during my internship at Atomic, I was working in the 2D pipeline team as a junior technical director. And in the first month of my internship, my mentor has helped me a lot through understanding the work distribution, the workflow of the studio, as well as learning new software and applications required in the work. On the same time, I did some documentation job relating to research and development, as well as the usage of new tools. Well, one of the main part of my internship was a project about facial landmark-based motion capture and its application in 2D animation. The project intends to create a new interaction for 2D animators and the 2D animating process, as well as improving the usability of mocap in animation. So the very original motivation behind the project is that my PhD topic is about motion capture-based animation. And I personally really like animation, so I'm like very passionate about this. And also motion capture is a very advanced technology in the field of animation. However, when we talk about motion capture, many of us might have this impression that this technology is complicated, expensive, and hard to use. However, there's a kind of much lighter weight of motion capture, which is called facial landmark-based motion capture. The idea is by using 2D cameras to trace over human faces features, and by analyzing the motion output of different facial parts, we will be able to understand what kind of motions is delivering from the live action person. And the Adobe Character Animator is a pioneer software in this field, which the software provides a lot of preset 2D characters that could be driven by facial landmark-based motion capture. So, however, one limitation of Character Animator is that the poses are triggered only when the motions reaches a certain threshold, and there's no interpolation between poses. However, after I get started in Atomic, I start to learn the new softwares and the 2D animating software used in the studio. So the software we're using is called Toon Harmony. And according to my supervisors and mentors, there's a super cool feature provided by the software, which is called Master Controller, which allows user to input different poses for one character and automatically generate a widget to control that character in a very smooth way. And by using Master Controller, we can post a character and create very nice subtle change of the poses with interpolation and very naturally. And also the Master Controller provides different kinds of widget. For example, in the previous slides, that was a grid widget. And also it has slider widget that helps to posing the linear poses. And there's also stack widget that combine the features of slider as well as the grids. So after getting to know this knowledge, we started to think, oh, what's going to happen if we combine facial landmark-based mocap with the master controller? Is there a way to build a connection between the two and send the mocap data to the master controller and automatically control the pose movement, the interpolation of the character through the motion capture? And this is how we originally proposed our project's conceptual framework. And the biggest part of this is, first of all, how to understand the mocap output, how to translate the mocap data into meaningful motions, how to build the connection between the two components, and how to send the data in a way that master controller could understand and make it real time. So starting from analyzing the mocap output, we proposed an animation character's facial expression hierarchical analysis, which consists of 3 levels, where the level 1 is about considering a live action person's facial components as independent component. So we are looking into the geometrical features of eyes, for eyebrows, mouth, nose, to understand the motion of it. The level 2 consists of a grouping between like 3 or 2 facial parts. And the level 3 is an overall analysis of the facial's motion based on all the components of a face. So basically, the analysis of the motions goes from level 1 to level 3 in a way that we analyze the independent part of face, and then we analyze the emotions. However, when it comes to projecting the emotions to a 2D character, we do it in a reverse way. We consider emotions as one of the most important part of a 2D character's facial expression, and the subtle change of single facial part comes after that. So let's make a very simple example. For example, when a live action person is giving a awkward expression, the face of that person could look like a smiling face, but the overall emotion is awkward. So if we only project the 2D animation in a way as a point-to-point projection, if we just translate every single facial part's motion to the 2D character, the result will look pretty stiff and unnatural. However, if we do it in this kind of, in our proposed way, we start from the emotions and the small changes came after that, we might be able to create a more natural and more organic animating result. So in our project, because we have limited time, we set our objective to completing the level 1's proof of concept by conducting facial landmark detection for human faces, analyze different facial parts, translate it to the data that could be understood by the master controller, and build that kind of connection between the mocap program and the 2D animation software. And ideally, the system should work in real time. And we need to have a calibration system for capturing 0 poses for different users so that it could create a more reliable 2D animating result for different users. And our progress so far is that we are able to accept user input bound values for different mouth poses. And we capture mocap data, interpret the data into meaningful motions, translate it in a way that the master controller could understand, and send the data to the widgets. And then we are able to realize this real-time controlling through motion capture to 2D characters. And for the system, we have 2 options. One is by using pre-recorded and translated data. And as you can see here, we are sending mocap data to the shark character. And the character is saying, "Hello, my friend." The second option will be using real-time motion capture. So by clicking the real-time capture button, we can use the mocap program to enable a real-time interaction between the user and the animation characters. So other than speeding up the animating process, the system will be also potentially applicable in different scenarios. For example, here is a video from one of my supervisor, Dave. And this is a project that I did when he was in Nickelodeon. And this is a VR interview of Ninja Turtle. As you can see, the fans are wearing a VR headset, and the fans is entering a 2D virtual environment with real-time Ninja Turtle characters. And the characters is actually talking to the fan. Well, the 2D characters are driven by puppet animation manipulated by the animators, and they also have voiceover actors doing the voiceover for the character. So the animators are taking care of the workflow behind the scene. And this is Dave. Pretty cool. All right. And in the future work, there's several efforts we can make. For example, add a calibration system for capturing 0 poses and calculating customized threshold for different users. So our system is applicable for a wider range of users. Potential assistance from sound recognition, just like the state-of-the-art, the character animator also has this feature that use sound recognition module to help improve the accuracy of the lip sync translation. Data cleanup, it's a very important part of motion capture. We could add in some method to smooth out the motion curves and also getting rid of some unnecessary keyframes for less jittering and extreme values. Also, based on our proposed hierarchy, we can expand the facial parts analysis to higher level. For example, the level 2 and 3, the analysis of facial parts groups and the emotions. And finally, involving the animators. I think it will be a very exciting part to do if we can invite animators to test our system in the future and get their feedback from an animator's point of view. And finally, I would like to summarize the lessons that I learned from my internship with 3 keywords: communication, learning, and management. So communication comes first, because I think it's particularly important to make myself on the same page with my mentors and with the team. So throughout my internship, I found that understanding, so when I'm new to an environment, I think it's important to understand my roles and also other people's roles. And to achieve that, I chatted with different people in our studio from different positions, and also asked a lot of questions to them. I found this process particularly helpful because it helps me to understand what are the interesting possibilities in the industry, as well as getting to know new people, and also heard of many interesting experiences and stories. Get involved. This happened to me quite naturally because my mentors and my teammates, we share similar topics and interests, so it happened quite naturally. But I think it still will be very helpful if someone could be responsive in a team and also actively participate into non-work related events, because that's where you really get to familiar with people and share the progress of your project or your work actively with your lead or your teammates. Learning. So here I want to share an idea that I learned from our graduate professional development workshop that I found super cool. The idea is called Skills Translate. And the main idea is that same skill could have different forms in academic and non-academic contexts. So I think it will be very helpful for one to try to find the connection between your academic skills and the skills required in your work. So this will help you quickly understand what should I do in the work, as well as will help you quickly speak the same language with your teammates. Management. Even though someone is not in a management position, it's still very important to manage things, especially when it comes to work. Prioritizing is something that I felt benefited a lot throughout my internship, because it helps me keep track on time and save me from a lot of anxiety. And project management, these 2 points are from the people that I talked to. One is from our line producer, and he mentioned that it's important to understand what are the various motivations for different people. And one is from our production manager that she mentioned it's important to pay attention to the timeline and budget. So I found that research and project management is also something in common. So I guess they will be helpful. So yeah, I think that's everything I want to share today. Thank you so much for your listening. And also I would like to sincerely thank Clue and Atomic Cartoons, and also all my supervisors and mentors in Atomic Cartoons, and also my supervisor, Professor Chris Jocelyn. This wonderful experience wouldn't have happened without any of them. Thank you all.
Thank you, Leah. That was a really cool presentation, and I love seeing all these supportive messages from your mentors and team members. It's really great.
So hi everyone, my name is Oluchi Audu. And I'm currently a master's student in human-computer interaction under the supervision of Dr. Chris Herdman and Dr. Van Bentham. So today I'm going to talk about my internship experience at the National Research Council of Canada. I started my internship in January 2021, and it'll be ending in June. So it's going to be a 6-month long internship. So my presentation today will just be a reflection of how much I've learned throughout the past months during my internship, and how I've also progressed during the past months. So I was quite fortunate because my internship work is quite similar to my research work. So I'm currently doing an internship in the Flight Research Lab at the National Research Council. And then my personal research is primarily based on cognitive health and general aviation. So both my research work and my internship experience tie well together, and both of these aspects of my life inform each other. So I've seen myself using what I've learned, what I've been learning while carrying out my own thesis research on some of the projects that I am working on at the NRC, and also vice versa. So the images on the right here is just represent some of the work I've been doing in terms of my research. So I've been working alongside a team of researchers, human factor professionals, and engineers in the Flight Research Lab of the NRC. And my role mainly includes doing literature review, writing research reports, survey design, and data analysis. So now I'll briefly go through the main projects that I have been working on for the past 4 months. Due to security and privacy issues, being a government organization, I will not be able to go into grave detail about these projects, but I'll be giving a brief overview. So the first is a public trust in automation project, which I have been working on with Cadence, who is a member of who works at the NRC. So this project involved assessing Canadians' perception and intent to use a new technology called advanced air mobility. So the project involved developing and submitting a project proposal to the review ethics board, and I played a huge role in writing this proposal. After the proposal was approved, we then started developing a survey on Qualtrics. Right now, we are still in the process of ensuring the survey flows well before publishing it to the public to fill up this questionnaire. We expect to finish data collection and start data analysis mid-May. The second project I've been working on is a literature review on the levels of attentiveness in human supervisory control. So human supervisory control refers to a human's interaction with a system to transform data or to produce controlled actions. So generally, it's human supervisory control involves elements of interaction between humans and the machines they're working with. So the literature review focuses on human supervisory control in the aviation sector in particular, and the different levels of attentiveness involved in the different tasks. And this project is still ongoing. Then the third project I have been working on is another proposal for the Review Ethics Board. This one is mainly based on cognitive and neuroergonomy. And the main purpose of the study for which the proposal is being written is to assess pilot physiological activity during real and simulated flight tasks. And this project is also still ongoing. So in terms of the hard skills I have developed so far, survey development and experimental design is right on top. Before now, I hadn't done any survey development, and so this was definitely a good opportunity to learn that skill. in the future, I also expect to sharpen my data analysis skills using the R software when the data analysis aspect of some of the projects come up in this month. Another skill I have really developed and sharpened is my research writing skill due to the literature reviews and proposals that I have been putting together. In terms of soft skills, I would say I have really improved my communication skill, which is definitely important since I have needed to communicate my questions, work progress, and so on to my supervisors and my teammates. I've also developed my organization and prioritization skills immensely during the course of this internship. So I was currently taking courses at school, and also I was working in my lab as a research assistant, and as well as being a TA in addition to this CLUE internship. So I had to learn to prioritize and organize my work strategically, so I can make the most out of the internship and also not slack in other aspects like my TA work and also my coursework. And most of this prioritization included a lot of discipline, a lot of journaling and taking notes of organizing what has to be done during the week or the day. Other aspects I have developed include my critical thinking skill as well as my attention to detail. One important thing I wanted to point out is how much this internship has allowed me to leave my comfort zone and also improve my confidence. So I'm quite introverted. So at first, building a connection with my supervisors and speaking out during meetings was quite a challenge for me. I would also say that I initially went through a phase where I was not as confident in conveying my opinions, but thanks to my supportive supervisors and also the ever welcoming team members, I soon became very comfortable and confident enough to openly contribute. And I would say that would be as a result of the open atmosphere that I experienced while working, or I am experiencing while working with teammates at the NRC. I also wanted to share some steps I've had to be intentional about because this internship has been virtual. So the first step included building interpersonal relationships with my supervisors and other team members virtually. So this involved effective communication as well as the frequent meetings we organized as well to just keep up with my work and also just to discuss any other thing. Then the second step included developing my online etiquettes, which of course was not only applicable to my internship, but also to my online classes and other virtual meetings. Some of these etiquettes included obviously showing up to the meetings on time, limiting distractions, preparing materials in advance, and so on. And then lastly, I've also been very intentional about ensuring my digital well-being. So this included limiting the time spent in front of the screen, taking breaks at intervals, scheduling my time appropriately, and avoiding overload. So all these steps were done in order to avoid burnout and also to maximize my performance. So lastly, I would like to thank the Enter committee for funding this opportunity. I would also like to thank and appreciate Dr. Girard and Tamara for organizing the CLUE internship and also being completely wonderful and supportive all through these past months. And last but definitely not the least, I would like to give special thanks to Andrew Law, Cadence Paleske, Sean Jennings, and the entire Human Factors and Civila team for the rich depth of knowledge they have continuously shared with me. And then this is my LinkedIn and my email addresses in case you would like to reach out. Thank you.
Thank you, Oluchi. Great presentation.
Hi everyone, my presentation is about my experience in Neurofit. I'm Sepanta, I'm a PhD student at Carleton University. I'm working on virtual reality and my interests are input interfaces, tangible devices and electromagnets. And This is my only good picture that I have on my computer, so I use it everywhere. So I was working in a startup, Neurofit. So Neurofit is a startup working on the brain health. So for example, people who had stroke or some kind of brain injury may need some mental health care, and Neurofit provides that. So basically it's a virtual rehabilitation tool that brings patient and professionals together, as they quote in their website. And it can, the healthcare providers can use it to save time and resources and finances. And they can provide more detailed and personalized support to the patients. And this is our team. So it was our team is much larger than these two guys, but I was working with these two guys. Alex was the founder and CEO, the big boss, and Sage was the another developer. I'm working as a developer, as a software developer in Neurofit. And so let's see how Neurofit works. So basically, it's a game-like exercises to improve your mental health. So for example, if you want to focus on improving your memory, you can uh, choose a game, and then that game is based on your memory. So basically, you have to memorize some kind of pattern and repeat that in the game in order to score some points. It also has like games for attention and processing the information and things like that. So when I joined the Neurofit, I asked myself, how can I help? How can I provide something new? And I figured that there was no direct way for a healthcare provider to monitor the patient. So we came up with the uh, idea of in-session video calls in order to make healthcare provider and patient connected. And so as you can see here, this is one of the sessions, and we have the um, video call inside of the game, and patients can have video call with their healthcare provider, with each other. They can share their screen to kind of share the information what's going on, and healthcare provider can guide them through the session, and they can chat in written form. After that, we went to the stage of expanding the idea. So we were like, what can we do with it? And we asked ourselves, can we have patients calling each other, like just to hang out, or maybe they can play together in the same sessions? And that lead us to my second project in Neurofit, which was the multiplayer mode. So basically, multiplayer mode is like exactly what it sounds. It's like more than one patient in one session. They can compete with each other. They can cooperate with each other to solve the puzzle of the exercise, or you can have your mentor, your healthcare provider with you, besides you in that session, guiding you or helping you. So we had some problems with the multiplayer mode, both technical and in theory. I cannot go into the technical problems, but in theory, we have to have some kind of matchmaking system to kind of match people with the same level of expertise together in order to compete or cooperate with each other. But that kind of violates the privacy of the patients. So we came up with the third project, and this is my last project that I work on. in this internship. It was the shadow mode. So basically, it's a way to compete with yourself. And in order to explain that, I have to give you a brief example. So imagine that you want to participate in a running competition, and you're going to train yourself every day naturally. So what you do is that you're gonna run every day. You're gonna track your time or a distance that you've run, and then the next day you will try to improve that, right? So that would be the self competition method. Uh, Basically, every single player on your mobile phone does the same thing. You will see your score, you compare it with your best score, and you try to do better next time. But there is another way of improving yourself, is that you can ask your friend to join you in running, and that kind of rivalry will basically you will push each other to improve. And as I said before, we uh, we couldn't have that kind of another like third person in the sessions. So we decided to combine these two methods together. So for example, back to our example, imagine that what if you could actually see a shadow of yourself from yesterday in front of you when you're running. So imagine that you had like some kind of time machine, and you bring back your yesterday with you, and you run together. Basically, you're competing with yourself. Uh, we can do that in our Neurofit. So I'm going to explain how it works. So one of the sessions in Neurofit is to basically throw water balloon to hit some targets. After you hit a number of targets, like 10 of the targets, it will end, and it will show you your record and your time and your accuracy. So in shadow mode, after you've done the first try, the system will summon a bot, and bot do exactly what you did in the previous session, and you have to compete with that. So basically, you're competing with your previous round, and you can actually see what you did previously. And it's basically it sounds really strange, but you can definitely feel the difference, and you can definitely feel the like the competition, as strange as it sounds. But my experience was like, you are actually better than what you think you are. You can feel that, and it was really interesting to see yourself in a different perspective. And it is harder than you think, and even if you lose, you won't feel bad, because uh, it was yourself doing that. You cannot be jealous of yourself. So both ways, if you improve, you improve. If you lose, you won't feel bad, and both ways works pretty well, especially for the people in that situation. And I'm going to talk a little bit about my experience in working in a startup. So previously, my previous internship was in actual company, like a big company, and the differences are like, in a startup you can explore different ideas, and they allow you to do that. And after your exploration, you can uh, execute them. Like, you can see your ideas is kind of implementing into the actual project. and it allows you to learn a lot because, as I said, you're exploring the wide range of ideas. But at the same time, you have a heavier workload because you kind of have to match your startup with the customer need, and it's not like a little update to your existing code. You have to like throw the whole project away and do it all over again. So that was it basically. Thank you, Enzer, Clue, Audrey, and Tamara. They helped me a lot.
Thank you, Sepanta. Great presentation.
Thanks.
I really like your project focus on previous self. I think like prior research has mostly focused on examining the effect of ideal self in motivating users, and your focus on previous self is, I think, something completely new. So I really enjoyed your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Does anyone have questions for Spenta about his projects or his specific experience at Neurofit?
It was a really great experience.
I bet.
Yeah.
And I think your mentor Alex just joined
Yeah.
just right on time, which is great.
My boss. Yeah.
Perfect. I now actually want to ask all presenters, Spenta, James, Leah, Daniela, and Kazuma's question, which was, it was a really good question, so I saved it until the end. So their question was, Clue is now concluding, what are some ways that incoming and future HCI students at Carleton can still gain some of the same benefits?
So I can answer this question.
Mm-hmm.
So I think even though the clue is concluding, but many of us are still sticking around. So if any of you still if you all of you are like welcoming to reaching out if you have any questions or you want to like connect with the companies that you're interested about. Definitely reaching out, and any question is welcome.
Thank you, Leah.
No worries.
Any other presenters who want to?
Yeah, sure, I can speak a little bit to this.
Yeah.
So coming from a non-HCI background, coming from psychology, I found the biggest thing that helped me really become familiar with user experience research was immersing myself in it and becoming familiar with all of the terms and all the ways in which research is conducted in this field. And to that point, I found that attending UX related conferences, watching other UX figures talk about their works, such as the talks on the Clue YouTube page, and some of the workshops and talks that I've attended over the course of my internship were really helpful to me in getting familiar with what user experience research is about, how to conduct it, and where I, as a non HCI person, could really fit into that. So I think that's probably the biggest recommendation for me would be to immerse yourself in it, get familiar with watch talks, get familiar with how research is conducted, and maybe connect with some people in UX locally to sort of get insights from them, pick their brains a little bit.
Yeah, I think those are great suggestions, James. And to add to that, some people who might not be focused on research, you can also start your own projects. There's definitely something value working in a professional setting, but there's nothing stopping you from applying some of the things that James was mentioning, the things that you'll learn immersing yourself in the community, applying them on your own terms. If you've got time outside of your studies, come up with a wireframe for something new, or make a game on your own. And maybe if you can get together with some of your classmates and start practicing what it's like to work on a team, communicating across priorities and all sorts of things. those things are super fun. And also, if you end up being successful and sticking to it, that's something that you can add to your portfolio as well.
And just as an extension to what Daniela and James mentioned, UX conferences are really good ways to connect with people in the industry. And also, as Daniela said, making personal portfolios is a good way to put yourself out there and also make, potential employers see your work.
Really, all great recommendations. Thank you.